So welcome everybody to Driftless Discussions. Our guest today is Caroline, and I will let her give a wonderful introduction to herself.
That is absolutely fine. And I'll actually do it as part of my presentation. So maybe I'll just kick things off. I was saying sort of before we started more formally, my thought is to talk for absolutely not more than 20 minutes. So I'm going to time myself right now because I really would love to just talk with all of you. So I'm trying to just give you some info about me that kicks off some conversation, but I'm super interested to hear what everyone else is up to. So my talk is Living with Floods, Research, Teaching, and Community Engagement in Driftless Streams, which is pretty vague and broad, but I'll throw some things at you. I wanted to give, let me see if I can get my slides going. I wanted to give you a little bit of background because you may have seen, I'm in the Department of English, which I'll sort of loop around to at UW-Madison, and often that doesn't make sense to people when they find out about what I work on, and in some ways doesn't always make sense to me. So just to give you some background of sort of how I arrived at this point, I was a graduate student at the University of Illinois at Chicago in a Department of English, but was also an NSF IGERT fellow, so an interdisciplinary program kind of focused on urban ecology and landscape ecology. So I had graduate training in ecology, even though I was also a graduate student in rhetorical studies in English as kind of a background. And then my first faculty job was at the University of Rhode Island, where I was for 6 years, so 2011 to 2017. And I was actually appointed across the departments of writing and rhetoric and the Department of Natural Resources Science. And I was physically in natural resources science. So I have a lot of affinity with thinking about kind of environmental sciences, geography. Like I think that maybe makes my work a little more recognizable and definitely influences how I work. So I arrived at UW-Madison in fall of 2017, just after the Taliesin curriculum meeting that I missed, apparently. And since then, so I've been in the Department of English. I'm an associate professor in rhetoric and composition, which is a small little group of faculty at UW-Madison in English, where we focus kind of broadly on public discourse, maybe. And so faculty in rhetoric tend to have some sort of specialty that links their interest in rhetoric with something in the world. And so we have someone in our department who studies visual rhetoric, someone who looks at Asian American rhetoric, someone who looks at literacy studies. And my work has always really been focused on fresh water and thinking about water. So I use approaches from rhetorical studies, and I do think in part about discourse, but not only. And certainly that's always kind of with an eye to thinking about actual on the ground work related to freshwater. And so as part of that job at UW, I teach a class that I'll come back to called Writing Rivers. It's English 245. It's a, I guess, seminar in the major, I think it's called, but it's always focused on Southwestern Wisconsin and is a community-based learning designated course, and teach grad seminars in community engagement, some in rhetorical theory, in methodology. So I have my graduate students in composition and rhetoric learning Atlas, TI, and R this week. They're like, what is going on? What's going on here? But that's kind of my approach, is just to train people really broadly to ask questions in a really broad variety of ways. I'm interested in looking at questions and problems from different angles is maybe a way to put it. So all of that work that I have been doing, I'm trying to move my little camera out of the way, has really converged around stream restoration, around flooding, which all of this should be familiar with all of you, and also around stories, which is maybe not super surprising given my position in an English department, and how those things come together. So I'll talk through some of the projects I'm working on just to kick off discussion. So one sort of premise maybe to start out with is this idea from me on this beautiful backdrop by Tim Hunt. The language we use shapes and even builds the world around us. We tell stories about the worlds we inhabit and the worlds we hope to inhabit and hope to build. And those changing worlds shape our stories. And I feel like that's kind of a fundamental premise maybe of the work that I do, of thinking about how we narrate our lives, how we narrate our landscapes, how that actually makes changes to what we do in a landscape, and also how those landscapes shape us and change what we do at the kind of broadest level. So one quick quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer from Braiding Sweetgrass. Many of you, or all of you, are probably overly familiar with this book, but this passage really stuck out to me upon recent rereading. So Kimmerer says, the story of our relationship to the earth is written more truthfully on the land than it is on the page. It lasts there. The land remembers what we said and what we did. Stories are among our most potent tools for restoring the land, as well as restoring our relationship to land. And she continues, we need to unearth the old stories that live in a place and begin to create new ones, for we are story makers, not storytellers. All stories are connected, new ones woven from the threads of the old. I think that's a pretty good foundation for the sort of work that I'm talking about. So a few questions, key questions that drive pretty much all of my work, I would say, across research, teaching, community engagement, service even, are these three questions perhaps. So what stories do people tell about driftless area streams and about restoring those streams? And I'm using stories in a broad sense. How do we talk about things? How are driftless area streams changing, and how are those changes shaping the stories that people tell? So to tell you a little bit about the projects that I've been working on, my work is really all focused in the Kickapoo River and Coon Creek watersheds. When I arrived in Madison, I had a conversation with Paul Robbins, who's the Dean of Environmental Studies at the Nelson Institute and a geographer by training. He knew that I'd been working on questions of stream restoration, wetlands restoration, dams and dam removal, and public engagement, coastal storms and flooding in Rhode Island. And he said, oh, I just had the greatest conversation with Marcy West. She's the executive director at the Kickapoo Valley Reserve. It's the craziest story. It's got history, it's got dams, it's got management, it's got conflict. It's like everything that you're into. You should drive out to Lafarge and meet Marcy. And Paul always gives me really good advice. So I said, okay, I'll do that. And drove out and met Marcy. And, she's phenomenal. For anyone here who knows her, is not surprised by that. And just, there was all kinds of richness, very obviously, that synced with a number of things I was interested in. So that's been pretty much my whole trajectory since arriving, is everything's focused on the Kickapoo and Coon Creek watersheds. For some background, these are areas that are close to you and probably quite familiar to you, but just thinking about some of the background layers that really shape the work that I'm doing. Certainly the existence of post-settlement alluvium everywhere is a big one. So thinking about landscape change in the wake of Euro-American settlement in the area and what that has done to stream systems. I love these couple of pictures. Here I am, quite cold last November, November before in the top left. That's my colleague Eric Booth way behind me holding a RTK receiver. But I like that you're seeing the perspective of that my grad student Emma Lundberg is, just standing on the bank and she's looking way down at me. In the photo on the right, I'm standing in the water looking up at my students, Ben, Sydney, and Emma, and you can kind of see the same thing down below. So again, that's not surprising to you or unfamiliar, but it really shapes these stream systems and is an anthropogenic change, right? It's like humans did that, and humans did that out of particular narratives about movement and settlement and land and how to use land. So that's part of the backdrop that interests me. Another part of the backdrop, or two more, I would say, I'm always struck that these maps sync up pretty amazingly, which was not my, I didn't figure that out myself. I saw it, someone put these two maps together and kind of blew my mind. So the one on the left is the change in annual average precipitation. Again, you all probably know this, it's getting wetter in southern and western Wisconsin, and that's causing all kinds of changes. The map on the right is actually the CDC's Social Vulnerability Index map, which I was less familiar with. And that gets darker, so it's bluer with more vulnerability. And it's a little bit scary to me to see those two maps next to each other, that like the hotspots of blue on both are somewhat similar. And I've called out here Monroe County, which is sort of the heart of the Kickapoo, for thinking about, really there's a reasonably high level of social vulnerability. So these are places dealing with increasing rainstorms, increasing floods on top of a real layer of kind of lack of resources, isolation, lack of media coverage, lack of institutional safety nets in a variety of ways, and a pretty high social vulnerability score. The other piece of backdrop that really interests me is the amount of stream restoration work that's been going on. I love the clapping in the audience, silent clapping. So Trout Unlimited is kind of a major player in this if you're not necessarily familiar with the stream restoration world in the Driftless area. They really are involved, at least in part, in a whole lot of projects, often as a sort of partial funder alongside NRCS or alongside DNR with state easements and things. And they're actually doing a ton of work. So a lot of times these projects involve actually removing riparian trees, which has been of interest to me and my colleague Eric Booth, sloping banks, which you can see in the photo, installing in-stream habitat structures, and adding rock riprap. So in the Wisconsin portion of the Driftless, which you are in as well, I recognize, riprap is allowed and often encouraged and highly used in stream restoration projects, which is distinct from other portions of the state. So that's kind of the background that really drives a lot of the work that I'm doing, I would say. And work that I've been doing kind of research-wise for the last maybe two and a half years, all of this is done with my colleague, Eric Booth. So I should say over and over again, thanks to Eric. And he is absolutely my partner in crime on all of this. He's a hydrologist by training, but kind of a broadly trained hydrologist. So we've been really interested in these two sort of central questions: how do stream restoration efforts impact temperature, habitat, geomorphology, and ecology? And how do restoration managers describe what they're restoring to and for? And ultimately, how will those things fit together? But this is work in progress. So we're working on that. So what we have done at this point, what we started out doing was working on Conway Creek, which is in the Tainter Creek subwatershed of the Kickapoo watershed. So this is around Soldiers Grove. And there was a stream restoration project planned for summer 2018. So we decided, great, this is a great chance to look at impacts of stream restoration, put in data loggers to look at temperature, decided to take elevation measurements to look at these stream cross sections. We do that before and after the restoration project. We were also interested, as I said, in this question of the removal of riparian trees. So thinking about how tree removal might impact temperature or not. And that's been kind of a debate among fisheries managers, especially related to thinking about protecting brook trout, Southwest Wisconsin being a great area potentially into the future for brook trout management. So that's on people's mind. So we thought, this is a great chance to do that, set up, started working on our cross sections, got the data loggers in, and then this happened. So late August 2018, a colossal flood hits the area, certainly ran through our research site, of course, ran through everything in the area. And as I was saying more casually when we got on, our student Emma was like in the stream as the storm was coming, and we were begging her to get out and drive home. And she finally did. She was safe, but after a night in Viroqua because she couldn't drive anywhere else. So that changed our work. All of a sudden, a project that was about stream restoration impacts was about stream restoration impacts and flood impacts and how those things fit together. So we have returned to Conway Creek. We did these post-flood cross sections as well. We're still looking at temperature. All of that slowed down the restoration project. So the restoration project is kind of slowly unfolding over years. So pretty much all of our good research design was shot, which is not super surprising, working in a floody landscape with human people and financial constraints and state policies and all kinds of things. So this work is going on, but we're continuing to look at that site. Then in 2019, spring, summer, fall 2019, we had the chance to look at another stream restoration project, this one on Billings Creek, which is northeast of the Kickapoo Valley Reserve. So this is right along the edge of Wildcat Mountain State Park, if you're familiar with that area. And this is about a 510 meter project worked on again by Trout Unlimited and by the state. And so we're looking at similar questions. Question 1, changes in channel geomorphology. We're also looking a little bit at kind of vegetation change and things. And then I also added this piece about methane flux. That's part of a master's project that I'm doing, that I'm finishing up. That's like a whole story unto itself. So I could talk about that later. But we kind of added this methane piece on. I was sampling for methane flux weekly on the site, kind of throughout the entire season, with hopes of looking pre-restoration, post-restoration, kind of comparing that with some reference sites. And then the site got flooded again. So of course there was a pretty big flash flood event in July 19th, 2019, that corresponded with the day after this project was completed. So really there was no way to disentangle stream restoration and floods once again. And this is what it did. So just for a few photos, this is the site actually pre-restoration, which was pretty lovely. I thought had a lot of fish in it, but there was sort of an erosion issue connected to a private road and pasture that was sort of driving this project. And project was completed. Actually, the state and TU worked with Valley Stewardship Network, which is a nonprofit in Viroqua, Wisconsin, who supplied native prairie seed. So they were trying out this new thing of spending quite a bit of money on adding native grasses instead of the sort of standard grass mix that you would put down post-project. So they did that. And then the next day, flooded out pretty significantly, drove back. And, this was what I was looking at. So all of that prairie seed is likely downstream somewhere beautiful. I don't know where exactly, went somewhere. I don't know where. So once again, we wound up looking at stream restoration and floods and how those are tangled together. And so just a few preliminary results that I don't even necessarily want to take time to go through, but we can come back to. What we're looking at really is, how does the channel change? So how does cross-sectional area change? How is the channel changing related to stream restoration and floods on these sites? We're looking a lot, the image on the top left is looking at methane flux and discharge. And what I seem to be seeing is that there are these like pulses of methane that are kicked out on streams with these flood or high pulse flow events. So it doesn't even have to be a big flood, but anytime there's kind of a spike in discharge, it seems like there's sort of a corresponding spike in methane, which is interesting for kind of thinking about the stream system. That also seems to be accelerated in the restoration site because of the disturbance of restoration, which is potentially interesting. That's not a huge amount of methane that's coming out, but I think there are perhaps some changes that we're making to area streams that we don't realize in some of these restoration projects, especially when you're trying to time them against some breaks in the rain, trying to execute a project before it floods again, kind of working in this increasingly flashy landscape. We're looking at those issues and looking at temperature and how temperature is changing, and that the temperature work is kind of still underway. On the human side, and then I will wrap things up just by talking quickly about stories from the flood after that, so that we can talk. As I said, we're interested also in how restoration managers talk about these issues and how they make decisions about these issues. And so we've done 18 interviews with stream restoration managers, pretty hyper local, like really, really focused on Kickapoo watershed restoration. We also did what's called a Q method workshop, which is a research design approach where you have participants actually sort through a variety of perspectives about an issue. So in our case, stream restoration. So they actually take this series of 30-ish statements about things you might value or strong views you might have about stream restoration. All of the participants actually sort them from, I agree, really, really strongly agree, really, really disagree, don't care a whole lot. And then you can analyze those to actually find out whether there are these different kind of surprising affinity groups almost. So people who are grouped around really strong perspectives about stream restoration, rather than grouped by their job, their training, the state they're coming from, et cetera. So mixing those together, we're seeing some strong disagreement, I would say, related to riparian vegetation. So like there are people who are all in on grass for a bunch of reasons that I can explain if you're interested when we talk. And there are people who are pretty deeply in on riparian trees, really thinking that trees should be used more often in restoration projects or shouldn't be removed in restoration projects. And then folks who are really interested in kind of thinking strategically, maybe how you would move through grassed areas and treed areas. There is quite a lot of disagreement about the use of riprap, about whether that's necessary in an increasingly flooding landscape or not. And again, all kinds of reasons for those that I can go through certainly, but that was definitely a divide amongst managers. And also one that surprised us a little bit was just thinking about erosion. So there's a group of people certainly cite erosion as a catastrophic problem in the region and one that needs to be addressed through restoration efforts and stream stabilization. And then there are folks who say, streams move, like there's erosion, there's deposition. They're just like, maybe the things that look so bad aren't actually that bad. And maybe we should be thinking more about process over form and thinking about giving streams a little more room to move and creating restoration practices that do that. And broadly, everyone thought that restoration efforts should work on floodplain reconnection. Whether or not they're actually doing that, that was like central goal for everyone we've talked with. So turning gears abruptly, I've been talking about streams and floodplains and people talking about streams and floodplains, but of course floods also affect people quite a lot, as you know. So for my last minute and a half or so, I'll say I've been pretty deeply involved in this project called Stories from the Flood that started, the idea for it started really in September 2018 when a group of people at the Driftless Writing Center, which is a nonprofit in Viroqua, were kind of cleaning out their own buildings and their neighbors' buildings, and were trying to think about something they could do to aid in flood recovery beyond just cleaning up buildings or only cleaning up buildings, and thought, hey, we're a group of writers. We help people tell their stories. What if we create this project called Stories from the Flood? And so Tamara Dean from the Driftless Writing Center got in touch with me about submitting a proposal to the Wisconsin Humanities Council to fund the sort of first wave of this project. And I said, sure, I'm in, absolutely. How can I help? And the Wisconsin Humanities Council did provide funding. And so in spring of 2019, we started collecting stories at local libraries. And the idea was that people would come in and might write down their story of how the flood impacted them, and nobody wanted to write. People don't like writing, it turns out. Writers like writing, but a lot of people didn't. But they really wanted their stories told, so it turned into an oral history project. And so been collecting stories, recording people's oral histories about their experiences in the flood. Also, crucially, we've been doing that alongside with some undergraduates. So I've had undergraduates in my Writing Rivers class every semester. So fall 2019, spring 2020, and even through the pandemic. So students working remotely still to support the project, work to collect stories, transcribe stories, quality control those transcriptions, create indexes to create an oral history archive, do a bunch of kind of associated work, and students at UW La Crosse have been doing that as well. And what that has now resulted in is 75 oral histories with over 100 residents of the Kickapoo and Coon Creek watersheds. I mean, these are nurses, farmers, teenagers, folks working at the gas station, guy who owns a motel, just like, how do floods impact regular people in their regular lives in really extraordinary ways? And we hope to be actually delivering all of this over to the oral history program at UW La Crosse, hopefully right around the end of the semester. I think we should be ready with all the files. and to the Vernon County Historical Society so that people can access all of these oral histories. They'll be publicly available through UW La Crosse. You can just log on to their site and listen to them. I'm also working with the Driftless Writing Center to put together a findings report that will go out to policymakers and decision makers now-ish this spring.
Sort of.
And working on a public facing map. So I have a student, Ben Sellers, who's been doing a lot of work to embed audio clips into this map so that you can kind of move around the watershed and actually see some photos that the DNR took post-flood and also listen to audio associated with sort of different sites on that map, and then have some students working on public health and mental health materials related to that as well. And so where do we go from here? Stories from the Flood is ongoing. And then I'm also have a project that just started this semester through the NSF, what's now the DICES, DISES program, but was CNH, Coupled Natural Human Systems, with my colleague Eric Booth and Rebecca Lave from Indiana University, who works on stream restoration. That's focused on the Kickapoo and Coon Creek watersheds, looking at stream restoration and flooding, sort of builds to participatory modeling workshops that will involve local stakeholders and kind of emerged really out of a lot of conversations with folks in the watersheds about what they're trying to do and hope to do. So I'm going to stop talking because I went longer than I thought I would. And I would just love to talk with all of you. So thanks for listening and having me. And yeah, I'd love to hear what everybody is doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caroline. I think
you.
What might go well with this is to kind of go around the room real quick, because it sounds like you want to make some connections with people. So if people could say roughly who they are, what they do, and how they're connected to this. And feel free to skip if you want to, but I'll go first. John Peterson, Amphibians and Reptiles, but I actually get out and do endangered cricket frog consulting. So I go out to these streams, anywhere they want to put in riprap in this area, I have to go see it. And I record frogs and listen for frogs, and I work with landowners. So I've been to a lot of these riprap sites.
Wow.
And so it's really neat to me. When I got here, Chris Wright, who's going to go next, connected me with Jeff Hastings. When you say to dare, it's Jeff Hastings.
Yeah, it's Jeff. Yeah, now it's strictly Jeff.
He is so good at getting money, which is amazing. And so I'm out in these streams, but another really cool thing I did with managers was going on his bus tours that he was doing. I've only done one, but there was one in Grant County, and you basically ride around on a bus with a bunch of stream managers, and you get out and you visit 3 different sites. We went to a winery, and it was like one of the coolest things I've ever done. And talking about hearing stories and getting different perspectives, it was very cool. And when we were going from site to site, people would talk into a microphone on the bus. And so it was part like symposium, it was just so cool.
I did one of those bus tours with Jeff. It was great. Year before last. And yeah, it's phenomenal. And we made so many connections to people for this larger project. It was great.
Awesome. So that's me, Chris Wright.
Hi, Caroline. Thanks so much for doing this. I already sent you an email. You and I need to talk. I've been doing stream restoration work with students and research for the past 15, 16 years with the Harry and Laura Nora chapter down here in Grant County, looking at before and after restoration, measuring all sorts of different stuff. I have some writings available, but yeah, you and I need to talk.
I'm in. Let's talk. That would be great. I should get Eric too, and maybe the 3 of us can meet.
Yep.
All right, Dan Fisher.
Hey, I'm Dan Fisher. I'm the rec club president here. I don't know. I've been doing a lot of work with like riparian strip work on campus, redoing the stream along Roundtree Branch, getting the honeysuckle out. I just overall enjoy doing restoration work like that. Oh, there's more.
We just had a stream restoration project that happened on campus, and it was interesting how that one thing in the stream affected so many different people that we're still trying to work out a better arrangement of how we manage our streams and land on campus. Speaking of that, Amy Seaboth Wilson.
Hey, I really loved your talk. This was really fun. And I realized I'm the sustainability coordinator at UW-Platteville. So I work in facilities and kind of often tie conversations between the academics and facilities and try and get projects moving, really is a lot of what I do. And in listening to you, I like realized that I don't have a very good understanding of our streams, and it's something I'm gonna tag team here. Chris, right, I've been meaning to reach out to you too. I kind of like am feeling the need to have a crash course. I love how you explain like the streams are telling a story, and I have just enough awareness of that to be dangerous, right? Like I can make assumptions about what stories are being told, but I'm not informed. And I thought your slide where you showed the culture, how did you frame it? Cultural sediment, I think you called it.
Post-settlement
really
alluvium, but yeah, a lot of people describe it as cultural sediment.
I loved that. And I want to understand that better. I want to understand why when I look at a stream, I'm seeing these like cutouts, and then in the summer, why our streams around here get like that weirdly iridescent, opaque look to them. And I don't know, people ask me these questions and I don't have good answers, and I would love to know all that. So I don't know if Chris, I'm looking at you wondering if we could do like a crash course, or am I asking questions you get a lot or not? But
No,
we look
I
at streams
think-
all the time.
I think you and I and Chris Underwood could probably sit down and do a lot of damage in about an hour.
That would be awesome. I would love that. Yeah. So Caroline, thank you for prompting all these thoughts and giving us a forum for making these connections.
Absolutely.
And one of the things we're working on with sustainability is telling the stories of our land better and connecting with landowners. And Chris and both of the Chris's here on the call have been part of a discussion about reaching out to our local watershed and trying to just create community and understand, land management and understanding perspectives, a lot of the things that you're interested in. Yeah, Jeff Hipschman.
Hey, sorry, John and Jeff, can I just like jump in and just apologize for a quick second? John had like given me the perfect platform to talk about how we're working on doing land management or outdoor space planning, and I just skipped it. I like jumped right over it. So as a quick backup, we have 362 acres of land on our main campus. And then that's the one right in the city of Platteville. We have 400 acres at Pioneer Farm, just south of Platteville, 10 miles south. And they're doing a lot of water runoff research for like long term now at that farm, which is cool. And now they're doing grazing and stuff in conjunction with that. And then north of campus by about 6 miles, we have what's called the Platt Mound, which is 90 acres over a mound, and it's wooded and it's a natural area. Some faculty are using it in different ways. I know like Jeff has been doing flying squirrel research. You can talk about that obviously better than I can. And then north of us right now, we also sort of have this relationship with the two-year campuses who each also have a lot of land, which is really quite crazy when you think about we're a higher education institute, and apparently we're also major landholders and land stewards. And we as a group in this room, I think, really want to be taking that role as land stewards much more seriously and intentionally. So I think that's where John was kind of like launching that conversation. So thank you for letting me go back and kind of like circle around to it.
That's awesome. And yes, I know the mound with the M. I've seen the mound with the M. It's notable.
The biggest M in the world, they say.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Jeff.
Yeah, so I'm Jeff Hipschman, and first of all, thank you. It's very interesting today. I'm not a water guy. I'm a water guy to the extent that I'm originally from Nebraska, where there's the Platte River and the Missouri River and small little creeks. And when I found, and I like canoeing, and so it was a bit of a canoeing wasteland. And when I moved to the Driftless, I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. So that's I like canoeing driftless streams. I've mentioned this at a previous one of these deals. I went out just once. All it took was once with Chris and some of his students very early on to see him electrify a stream and show me the hidden things underneath. And, you know, my brain blew up because I just couldn't believe what was in these streams. And the next day I bought a fishing pole, and yeah, so it's a beautiful, I think the people that live here often take these streams for granted. I still frankly get excited about streams that have rocks in them. So that's where I'm at.
I love that. And I love electrofishing. I would go out with Matt Mitro from Wisconsin DNR. Took me out on a lot of excursions. He was very patient with me to get me familiar with a lot of streams. And it's so fun. And it's always fun to see someone fishing on the banks. And then when you come by and they see what comes up, it's totally mind blowing. I agree. It'll get you every time.
Nate Forrest.
I'm from criminal justice, so I don't have a whole lot. I think John knew that when he called on me. He was just being polite. I like to go outside. Yeah, I just really enjoyed the driftless discussions. So just a fan.
Thanks
for
coming.
sharing, Nate. Chris Underwood.
Hi, Carolyn. I will extend my thanks as well to you for spending time with us today. So I grew up in the Southern Appalachians, and when I moved to the Driftless area, I kind of immediately fell in love because it reminded me of the foothills of the mountains that I called home. And so I'm a biogeographer by trade, and the work that I do specifically within the Driftless is largely climate reconstruction studies with my colleague Evan Larson, who's not here today. He's oftentimes at these Driftless discussions, but he's not with us today. But we put together a 300+ year reconstruction of drought using oak, prairie oak specimens recently, and most recently we're working on climate reconstruction using eastern red cedar, which are longer lived than the oaks, and they when they die, their wood is preserved much better than oak wood is as well. And so we're going back into the 14th century with that one, reconstructing temperature. So we did drought with the oaks, and we're looking at temperature with the cedars because they have different climate responses, largely in terms of what their annual growth reveals to us. And so we are constantly on the lookout for old cedars now, and that's kind of the phase that we're looking at in terms of kind of filling in gaps of the data and trying to push that record back even farther. And so we are hoping to get up into the Kickapoo and farther north along the Mississippi, looking at those bluffs in the next few years.
That is super, super cool. I don't know if you can see this, but this is a Post-it I keep by my desk. Can you see that? Appalachian and Driftless.
Not only the landscape,
question mark.
Yeah, the landscape and the people. There are so many parallels. Yes.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you about that.
I want to talk to you about that too. There are a bunch of folks who I know in rhetorical studies who are like Appalachian studies rhetoric people. And I've been reading their work and I'm like, man, there are some differences, but there are some really interesting resonances. So yeah, I'd love to talk that over as well as your other work.
So, and then the next geological step from that is one of our presentations later this semester, which is the connection between the Driftless and the landscape of Ireland. And so we've got, I'm blanking on his name, Kevin Cook, is that what it is? Kurt could correct me.
Looking at Ireland. That's fine. We were watching, St. Patrick's Day yesterday, and we celebrate. So we were watching The Quiet Man last night, which is, hopefully you all know that film. And if you don't, you should watch it. And I was totally obsessed with looking at the streams last night. I was like, this is kind of more familiar than I thought it was in the past. So yeah, connections abound.
Making connections, yeah. Pete Lammers. And before Pete gets on, I just want to say I was blown away when I heard his presentation the other day about what you've been working on, Pete. Super cool.
Well, thank you. So I'm Pete Lammers. I teach classes in animal nutrition, and my work looks at integrating crops and livestock into more resilient agricultural production systems. The work that John is talking about is we recently were working on some projects looking at feeding hazelnuts to pigs in the area. So.
And the cool thing about that is there are various people around looking at hazelnuts and agricultural systems. And then Pete even did he was talking about making, this is a dream, but making something like Iberico ham from hazelnut fed pigs. And he also did a study abroad trip to Spain to meet some of the Iberico producers, which is just so cool.
Cool. Super cool.
Yeah, so thank you, Chris, or thank you, John. And Dawn Lee was actually one of the co-leads on the trip that we took to Spain. I'm not sure if there she is.
Feel free to share if you want to, Dawn.
No, Pete did it well. I have soils lab here at 1 o'clock, and I've actually got students coming into classroom right now, so they get to listen to you guys. It's been very interesting.
Thanks for coming.
You bet.
All right. Patricia, did you want to introduce yourself? It's okay if not. And then Kurt, I'm sure could talk a lot about this stuff. There he is.
Hi,
Hey,
Kurt. We were talking about you before you joined.
Well, good. That's why I didn't join. I didn't want to hear from you. It's my Midwesternness coming through. I just get warm fuzzies stepping into this group here for several reasons. Caroline I've known each other since she arrived in Madison pretty much. And I've been watching her project and with her colleagues grow since it started. And it's just an amazing piece of work, just great work. And I just get so warm fuzzies, just seeing how people are responding to it as much as the work itself. And the fact that she's able to interact with you all now. I just love this. I love this for the sake of the Driftless, for the sake of the UW system, for the sake of the water, for everything. So anyway, I'm just thrilled to see all these connections. And then there's always new connections. I just listening to Pete. And another thing about those cork oaks over in the Dehesas of Spain is they're a really important part of the diet for the Eurasian cranes of Western Europe. It's the major wintering area for Eurasian cranes. So maybe if we get more hazelnuts, we're also the sandhill cranes are going to love it. Anyway, thank you so much, Caroline, for sharing. Every time Caroline presents on the program, I learn a lot more about the details of what she and her students and colleagues have been doing.
All right. Caroline, is there anything you would like to share more about, or?
I mean, all kinds of stuff. I don't know. I am similarly overwhelmed with warm fuzziness as Kurt. I mean, I am an enthusiastic person who adores enthusiasm in others, and so like to meet a group of people, oh my gosh, you meet on Zoom to talk about the Driftless just like regularly because you like to. Can I get in on that?
Yeah.
So I love that. So I love the follow-up, the several follow-up conversations we've identified already. I guess one question I am interested in, well, maybe two. One I asked a little bit about is, right, like how your group is kind of moving forward. So it sounds like you have some curriculum discussions, you have these Driftless conversations. And then there's probably not enough time for this, but I'm super interested in learning about the different kinds of teaching that you're all doing already that connects to place and involves undergrads in working in place and thinking about place. So those are some of the things I'm curious about, but I know they're beyond the scope of 6 minutes, perhaps.
And do you have to run right after this? Because
I should, well, I have to help a child get on an appointment at
which is
1-ish,
important.
but I could also, yeah, so I should go do that. Yeah.
Cool. There.
I could say a word on that. I just sent a message. Some of you are on my email list, and you can pass it on to those who aren't. This kind of ad hoc Driftless educators group that has emerged out of doing the Driftless Reader.
That's what we were talking about.
Oh,
before you
okay.
joined.
Well,
Yeah,
well,
tell us more.
you'll see a message I just sent because of so many conversations, including with many of you all, about the desire to share our different experiences as educators across the region. And there's plenty more that we're not even connected yet, up at Winona, Eau Claire, and other places. But maybe after the busyness of this semester lets up some, we can organize some kind of a discussion just on that after you all have had this wonderful semester of internal conversation at Platteville. And then may we hope against hope that we could actually gather in person sometime later this year. So I'll just plant that seed with you all. And I added also, by the way, a link last minute to a presentation tonight about the conversion of the Badger Army ammunition plant. I'll be doing a presentation with good colleague Mike Mossman, the leading field biologist. So there's a link there if you're able to join in. And that includes, by the way, we hope to have more than a few members of the Ho-Chunk Nation joining us and help us to build those connections.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kurt. And something that Kurt had mentioned and we've talked about here, and these discussions don't have to be internal. I'm trying to make them external, but since this was the first semester, I haven't been sharing it maybe as well as I should. Amy and I recently talked about that. But yeah, we'd like to pull people into these discussions from anywhere in the Driftless or beyond that are interested. And so soon we'll start looking at a fall lineup and I can reach out to you guys to get suggestions. Yeah. And so Kurt had suggested, maybe we had an every other year symposium if life ever gets back to normal, one down here, one up in La Crosse, just so we can connect But yeah, we'll let you move on to where you got to go, Caroline. Thank you so much. This is just like, we're just dropping seeds. Hopefully they don't wash downstream.
They won't wash downstream. I mean, only in good ways. They won't wash away from us downstream. But this is great. I'm super grateful to you all for reaching out, and I'm going to follow up with a bunch of emails that I see in my inbox. Cause yeah, I would love for this to be the start of a conversation rather than a one-off, bye, thanks, see you later. And I think there are a number of people at UW-Madison who would be interested also, who are interested in the Kickapoo and Coon Creek particularly. And then, like I said, Margot Higgins at UW-La Crosse, Niti Mishra at UW-La Crosse also, who's doing really cool like drone imagery and has been helping us with doing drone footage of stream restoration sites. We can look at vegetation change. Like he's super interested in getting involved also. So yeah, let's keep the conversation going for sure.
Very cool. Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks everybody. And thanks Kurt for bringing us all together in the first place.
Hey, don't close off yet. I've got to get these emails off the chat side.
All right.
Okay, I'll leave to help my child. Bye, everybody.
Caroline.
Hope to talk soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just copying some of your email addresses here.